Thanks a lot. So, you guys are, yeah, it's on. Yeah, you guys are pretty hardcore, sticking around for the final session, although I guess you just need something to do before Brian hands out the, whoever's going to win the Xbox for turning in those yellow forms. But, when I submitted this topic, I talked to Brian about it, and it's like, hey, I know I work for Citrix, but this is a question in consulting that we get all the time. We go to customers trying to figure out, what do they want to do, and we get this question: should I be using Xenapp or Xendesktop? And I would actually imagine a lot of you have the very same question. So, it's a pretty simple question to ask, and how easy is it to answer? Well, if you look at the product breakdown of Xendesktop, if you get Enterprise, you get this thing called Hosted Shared Desktops, which is Xenapp. That means if you buy Xendesktop Enterprise, you get Xenapp, case closed. All right, any questions? I wanted to have the shortest session ever at Bri Forum so people would talk about me for years, but that's it. Everyone out. But seriously, it's the question. They have this together in the product. You buy Xendesktop, you also get Xenapp, and you think about it from the sales perspective, like, yes, we don't have to worry about it anymore. It's all in there. You know what? We just sell Xendesktop and they get Xenapp. From consulting perspective, we're actually happy about this too, because we don't want sales to tell you guys which product to use, because they're going to sell you the product that costs the most. So we actually prefer this method, is because now we can go in there and we can help all you guys try to figure out, do you want to use a Xenapp hosted desktop? Do you want to use your Xenapp applications? Do you want to use any freaking flavor of the virtual desktops that Xendesktop has? We can help you try to figure out which of those different modalities you're going to use. So I have two screenshots of, those are two of my different desktops. And one is Xenapp and one is a dedicated Xendesktop VDI type desktop. And can anyone tell which one's the Xenapp one, the bottom or the top? Yeah, I heard top. And it is because I actually didn't configure it completely, which we're going to go through. There are two icons in the top one in my taskbar at the bottom that are Server 2008. It's the PowerShell and it's the Server Manager. But there's some things you can do. Honestly, all you're going to do is unpin those and pin in Internet Explorer and Windows Media Player, and it looks pretty much identical to Windows 7. And that's actually, that used to be a huge case when we tried to do published desktops back in the day when we were on Windows 2003 and even 2000. So in 1998 and 99, I was working for a very large private company called Cargill doing Citrix MetaFrame 1.0 deployments. And we did published desktops. And Citrix said, you guys are crazy. But it worked really good for us. But the whole thing was, it didn't look like the Windows desktop operating system back then, so Windows 98. And so we had a lot of users who had issues trying to work with a Windows 2000 desktop because it didn't look like Windows 98. But we were able to do it, and it was very successful for those type of deployments. Now, at least with Windows 2008 R2, you can make them look identical. So what we end up finding out is that in consulting, when we go out to customer sites, there are a lot of assumptions out there. And we pretty much have to make all the customers just back up for a second. It's like, first, do you even need that desktop interface? I consider the desktop interface, that's an application. Do you need that application? A lot of people don't. Do you have to use VDI? Do you need that virtual desktop, the Windows 7 type desktop? And when I say VDI, I basically mean Windows 7 running in the data center. There's lots of different virtual desktops out there. All the different vendors out there have different terminology, but VDI has pretty much stuck. People say they hate VDI, but VDI it's just stuck as that. It's Windows 7 running in the data center. There's other assumptions that if you're doing a virtual desktop, you have to have lots of storage. Some types of virtual desktops you do, some you don't. And users need to install apps. Some users will, some don't. So you have to really figure out which of your users need these type of requirements. And what we find out is, we go into organizations, they're all saying, yeah, I need all these things, but they really don't. So typically what happens is we go into a project, and all of a sudden we're in a design. We're doing a VDI design. And the next thing is, I don't have any sound effects here, but it's like beep, beep. Let's back this truck up. We're not even at that stage yet. We don't even know if we're doing VDI yet. we might be doing something else. We might be doing just virtualized applications. We might be doing a hosted desktop. I'm not sure if we're doing the VDI use case yet. And this is why it's important. So this one is, let's say I have a light user workload. They might run a couple applications, nothing too intense. The blue line is light. It's for VDI. The red line is for Xenapp. So the first one is users per core. The higher on that one's better. With Xenapp, you're going to get a heck of a lot more people running on the core. The next one is basically the amount of RAM per user. Now it becomes low is better. The graphs are kind of funky that way. Make sure you're paying attention. And they're both small. They're light users. You really can't tell the difference too much. But then you got IOPS. I think I attended 3 or 4 different sessions here that mentioned IOPS, so I had to join in the gang and talk about IOPS for a little bit just to be cool. But even on Xenapp, IOPS, I don't ever remember talking about IOPS. I've been doing the Xenapp thing for over a decade. I don't ever once remembering having an IOPS discussion. I didn't even know what the hell an IOP was until 3 years ago. I didn't want to know. I still don't want to know, but I have to. So, that's just for a light user workload. If we go to a normal user workload, the numbers go down. Some go down, some go up, depending on which line you're looking at, the funky graph. But the distribution of them are pretty much the same. Xenapp is always going to be better than Xendesktop. And the same thing if you're doing power users. People who are really hitting that system hard, they're running their browser, they have lots of different tabs open, they have lots of different applications running. On VDI, you might get 5 users per core. On Xenapp, you're probably looking at 10. On the IOPS range, at a minimum, on a virtual desktop, you're at 25. It's more like 25 to 50. And even on Xenapp, it might be 10, if even that. So it's a lot less than what you'll see. So you look at the overall scalability. This just kind of summarizes the other slides. But if you put this into perspective of how much hardware you're going to need, so let's say we have 1,000 desktops or 1,000 users, and this is the best case. So we're all looking at light user workloads here. If I do VDI or Xendesktop, to do 1,000 desktops, I need however many servers that is. If I do hosted shared or Xenapp, I only need that many. That's a huge reduction in cost. And I'm not even getting into the licensing aspect because honestly, I don't want to. Besides IOPS, I don't even want to know about licensing. That's even worse than IOPS. So let's say we get to the worst case. Let's say these are heavy users hitting the system harder. You know what? It's going to be very similar type of a picture. VDI, just keep adding servers, more, and some more. Hosted shared, we'll have more servers because we have heavier users in the system, but still, you're looking at a pretty substantial decrease in the number of how much hardware you need. So based on scalability, let's do hosted shared desktops or Xenapp. All right, so now we've got, you buy Xendesktop, you get both. So I really don't need Xendesktop because Xenapp has better scalability, and it can look like Windows 7. Cool. But unfortunately, we have to slow down here. Users at work. This is my attempt to have some artistic creativity. You drive around, you see those signs. It says slow children at play. Users are at work. Because we don't want to go just on scalability alone, because we're going to miss out on some pretty important user requirements here. So the point here is bigger is not always better. Smaller is not always better. It all depends. The good old consulting answer. So there's a lot of desktops. I have 3 young kids, so I read a lot of Dr. Seuss, so we'll see a lot of Dr. Seuss analogies in here. But just to make sure we're on the same page, when I'm going to mention, I talk about like hosted shared desktops, hosted VDI, and different flavors of them. So hosted shared is a Xenapp published desktop. That's what we consider it as a Citrix. I don't know what you guys call it, but that's what it is. Hosted VDI is Windows 7 or Windows XP in the data center. And this is what typically people call Xendesktop. And it's a pooled random desktop. It's a pooled static desktop. So random is I can get any desktop I want. Next day I get a different one. Next day I get a different one. Pooled static is I always get this desktop, but every time I reboot it, it goes back to the blank state. A dedicated desktop is I always get this desktop and I can reboot it. I can do anything I want to it, and those changes stay. The existing desktop is a P2V. So I have a physical desktop. I just virtualize it, throw it up on a hypervisor, and let Xendesktop run it for me. So that's all an existing desktop is. And a physical is a blade, which I actually have never seen anyone do those, but hey, it's in there, cool. And then streamed, so this gets kind of funny or weird with Citrix terminology here. A streamed VDI desktop is PVS to a VM or to a blade in the data center. But then we also have streamed VHD, which is PVS to a physical endpoint sitting at your desk. So now if you put all these things together, it's like, so we got Xenapp, we have Xendesktop with some PVS, and then we have PVS. But it's all Xendesktop. So this is Citrix's wonderful marketing terminology here is it's all Xendesktop, but some of it is and some of it isn't. So it's confusing for you, and it's very confusing for us too. That's how we like it, though. So, I talk about there's lots of things to think about. How do we figure out what do we need? Do we go one way or the other? I'm also a big Simpsons fan, but because that's my background, I think that's legal. I'm not, I didn't draw. It's my background, so I can use it. I'm not a lawyer either, so we'll see if that stands up in court. But the desktop, do you need that? Do you need the start menu, your taskbar, the desktop interface? If you're only running one application, no, you don't need this. If you're a call center employee, no, you don't need a desktop. So do not waste the money on buying all those servers and running Windows 7 because you don't need that interface. That is an application. The desktop is Explorer. That's your application. And a large portion of your users do not need that. Application count's another big one. It's like, whoa, we can throw as many applications as we want on Xenapp. Well, you can. What I see what happens a lot of times is that organizations, the IT is not going to find every application. They're not going to package every application if you're doing one of these streaming solutions. They're not going to install all these applications on Xenapp. It's just too many to manage. So they either, silo these Xenapp servers, or another option is maybe here's where you just do like a dedicated VDI type desktop if IT is not going to deliver all the applications a user requires. So if you have an insane number of applications, so some of our large enterprise customers, we go in there and we think we have 3,000 applications. If they say they think they have 3,000, that means they have 6, because there's a lot they don't even know about. It's like, how do you do that? How do you take 3,000 applications and try to put them into a pool type of virtual desktop? Right now, we go dedicated, and it's like, let the users install it. It's just easier. IT is not going to be able to support that many applications. It's insane. So it's like the only way to still provide 3,000 applications to all those thousands of users is do dedicated desktops and let the users manage it. User location. This is actually kind of important. We try to figure out, are your users located in headquarters where you have that high-speed link to the data center, where all the systems are running, or are they remote? For myself, I'm a remote employee, and I use a virtual. I use a dedicated virtual desktop. I can't use a stream VHD because I need a high-speed network in order to do the stream VHD option, PVS to the endpoint. You could do it over like a 10 megabit link. It will work. It just means that it's going to take a really long time because it's all streamed over the wire to your endpoint. If you have a 100 megabit link, you could still do stream VHD. It would be faster, and that's about the minimum we recommend for stream VHD desktops is 100 megabit. Of course, in the data center, we always recommend 1 gig because it's even faster and you're doing even more desktops. So user location is very important. Desktop lockdowns. So if you are in a type of environment where you have all these crazy security lockdowns in place, why are you doing a VDI desktop? Why are you giving them Windows 7? What we always said was, when you do Xenapp, it's usually a more controlled environment because Xenapp and terminal services have the little nuances, with the multi-sharing type sessions and multiple users on there. So a lot of people lock it down because if I, as a user, do something to that server, I probably just pissed off 100 other people, who are also on that server. So usually what I see is that the people who have rolled out Xenapp, all the Xenapp admins out there, have done a really good job locking that thing down because they understand the risk of not locking it down could, have a server shut down, or you could install something that impacts everybody else. So if you have really tough security requirements that you have to follow, we've typically seen it's a lot easier to deal with a Xenapp environment, because you have all the server tools in there as well to help lock it down than you are a desktop environment. USBs. So I was like on Google Images and I found, I typed USB attachments, and these are awesome. I mean, someone has a fondue thing for a USB attachment. How cool is that? But so, those of you who are familiar with Xenapp and Xendesktop know that, hey, we do support USB. But it's a little different. Doing USB redirection on Windows 7 is really easy because it's just a single user to a single desktop. Doing USB on terminal services Xenapp is very hard because not only do you have to do the redirection of the USB, you also have to make sure that everybody else on that server does not see that USB attachment you just put in. It's a lot harder to do. So if you have a lot of funky USB attachments, then they might not work in Xenapp. There's a lot of cases where we have users who have trouble using some of these USB type attachments on a Xenapp environment. But on Xendesktop they work great. On a VDI type desktop they work fine. It's just because the different way USB redirection has been implemented in the two different products. So you have to take a look at those type of attachments. Specialized hardware. This is really for anyone who's doing graphics, development, video, any type of sound or audio. You might have specialized, graphics cards, specialized audio cards. There might even be TV tuners I've seen in a couple instances. Yeah, you pretty much don't want to be doing that on Xenapp. Xendesktop, some type of a virtual desktop is going to be better, and not even the pooled or dedicated desktops. The ones that are running on a hypervisor. For something like this is when you would do like the Blade PC or the streamed VHD where you have your physical endpoint. Now I know some of the hypervisors out there are talking about how they can do some of the virtual graphics cards. Whether it works or not is another question. Doing Blade PCs, doing physical endpoints, stream to the physical endpoint will work. They work now. They've always worked. So you don't have to worry about those type of compatibility issues. So if you're in those type of situations, the type of desktops you're going to want to use are also reduced. So the next one we take a look at is user rights. We've got some users who require admin rights for some crazy reason. It might be because of an application. It might be because they have to do certain things to the system. That ain't going to happen on Xenapp. You give somebody admin rights on Xenapp, they're gonna really screw with the whole system. So again, if they need admin rights, that's pretty much a given. All right, you're going to a Windows 7 type desktop. Some users, especially developers, need to be able to control the reboot of their system. Again, you can't do that on Xenapp, or you could, but again, you'll tick off the users. So again, if you need reboot, if you have to be able to reboot the system, then you have to go to a virtual desktop. Custom backgrounds, that's lame. You can do custom backgrounds in anyone, and I've heard this as a reason for doing VDI against Xenapp or hosted shared desktops is I can do custom backgrounds. Have you actually ever tried to do a custom background on Xenapp? It works just like a desktop. Only you see it, nobody else does. So that is not a valid reason. Although I have read numerous blogs and heard numerous people talk that say it is. We ran into one interesting use case. It's for the government, and I won't say which one or which branch. But they have certain users that have to be able to install and use certain applications they find online to see what they do. So it's a playground. So it's like we're going to give them an environment that they can mess around on, and then once they're done, that whole thing is gone. You don't want to put this type of junk on your normal desktop because you really don't know what it's going to do. So let's give them a playground. And actually, I think Brian had a blog post about something like this about a year ago, talking about one of the use cases he was thinking of. It's like you could give people 2 virtual desktops. You give one, you give them a pooled desktop where it's all locked down. You have all the applications delivered by IT, and then you give them the second desktop, the playground, where they can install their own user-installed apps. And a lot of people called him crazy. He is crazy, but not for that. So it's actually a real use case that we have customers who give virtual desktops to certain users as a playground so they can test out some of these different applications and see what's going on. Familiarity is actually a big one. It was more important, back in the day. Does it look like my desktop operating system, or does it look like, a server? Windows 2003, Windows 2000, that was a big complaint that I heard people, who didn't want to do the type of published desktop on Xenapp, is because the start menu just looked funky. It was ugly. And from the user's perspective, and they're used to what they have at home. They want the little round start button or little oval one in XP, and you couldn't get that on Windows 2003 very easily. So familiarity was a pretty big one. See, so we have this huge list of stuff. All these different little things we talked about. It's like, and it helps you decide which way to go. So we got virtual apps, hosted shared, VDI pooled, VDI dedicated, VDI streamed, VDI physical, VDI existing, streamed VHD. So that's almost all the different types of things we have. And then we break it all down based on the stuff we talked about. So a couple things to focus on is, one up there says locked. It's a lockdown environment. We mentioned on. If it's a lockdown environment, I can do virtual apps because those are just published apps on Xenapp. I would recommend a hosted shared. I might recommend VDI pooled or VDI streamed just because whatever they do gets destroyed when they reboot. But if it's a lockdown environment, I wouldn't recommend dedicated. I wouldn't recommend the physical or existing or streamed VHDs. I just wouldn't recommend those. If they have, if they need custom hardware, it's like midway down, only thing I would recommend is VDI physical or streamed VHD. And then if they need a playground environment for a single day, it's VDI pooled or VDI streamed. And if they need a playground environment that is for many days, then you go with a VDI dedicated. So we have this, consulting, we kind of have this list that we try to break down user requirements to the type of virtual desktops. And we just, when we do the user analysis, we try to figure out, okay, this group of users needs these rights, and we put them in the categories. And then at the end, it's a matter of how do we get rid of as many of these categories as possible? Because there's a lot of X's, that means you can use those. And it's like we want to get rid of as many of these as possible because we don't want customers, we don't want all of you to have 10 different types of virtual desktops. Ideally, it'd be one, but that's not usually the case. What we try to do is get it down to maybe 2, potentially 3 different types of a virtual desktop. Now, the last thing we take a look at is what your skill set is. So if you are a Xenapp shop already, and you have a pretty good Xenapp environment, we are more inclined to be going down the Xenapp route because you have that skill set. There's no more training involved. You guys are, you're going to be experts on that. So it's going to be very easy for you to add more Xenapp servers, publish the desktops, and support the environment. If you don't have Xenapp, if you have no idea what Xenapp or terminal services is, we're not really going to want you to go down that route unless it's absolutely necessary. Because those of you who have used Xenapp know that there are some nuances with it because it is a multi-user environment. There's some things you have to try to figure out with application compatibility. Not as big as there was before, but there's still some things to think about. On the VDI side, if you have a really strong desktop management team, VDI is a great way to go because all you're doing is just virtualizing the desktop, but you can still use your desktop management tools. But if your desktop team sucks, which I've seen a lot, then it's like we don't want to make the VDI suck as well. So we'll put you on Xenapp, and we'll train you the right way to do it. So skill set is something a lot of people often overlook, but it breaks down pretty easily. If you have Xenapp skills, we're gonna push it to virtual apps and hosted shared desktops. If you got desktop skills, we're gonna push it to the VDI type desktop. So it's really based on what you guys have right now. So that's the criteria that we go by. To try to figure out all this stuff. And then what happens is, I actually changed this title too because I was in Benny's session earlier about I think it was like Windows is lying to you, and everyone's having fun with learn how to lie. I'm like, sweet, I'm going to show you how to lie to your users because I hate users. And all IT hates their users. You love to lie to your users. Yeah, it's a network guy's problem. So here we're going to lie. And we're going to tell you, basically go through it and how to configure your 2008 R2 environment to look and feel like Windows 7. So the first thing, this isn't the only thing. A lot of people end here and install a desktop experience as part of Windows 2008 R2. And what that does is it installs, which I think is the best tool of Windows 7, is the snipping tool. I use that thing every day. That puts it on Windows 2008. It puts all this other stuff on there as well. Some of it you're going to use. Themes. I remember back in the day, it was like, no, turn all that stuff off. People like themes. If you want to have a good user experience, you got to leave that junk on. I use it on my normal desktop, so why don't we give it to the users because they want to use it as well. When you turn on the desktop experience, you also get some other things that you pretty much want to disable: Windows Sideshow, Windows Defender, and Disk Cleanup. I actually had to look to see what the heck Sideshow was. I didn't know if it was like Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons. I had no idea. Apparently, it's this thing that you could have like a little display on the side of your computer, and you could be playing like your MP3s and media player, and it would show on the side. So you want to open up your laptop lid, and you could control it there. I've actually never seen that on a device, but Windows 7 apparently supports it. And then if you install the desktop tools, Windows 2008 supports it as well. But I'm pretty sure you won't be using that in the data center on your servers. I haven't seen any server manufacturer that has that, so you can go ahead and disable that. And the other ones as well, Disk Cleanup, you're going to have your own tools to be able to doing these type of server management activities, and you don't want all these different tasks that are going to impact how functional and how the system is going to respond. The Start menu is the next thing. When you use 2008, you have lots of different applications there that you don't want your users getting into. So you've got to hide those things. You got to get rid of them from the users. You got to get rid of the maintenance folder. You got to get rid of the accessories, system tools folder. Basically, hide those from the users. Or put them into the admin group so the users can't get to them. The next thing is the taskbar. I actually mentioned this in the beginning, when you guys were guessing which one was the Windows 2008 desktop. I actually didn't do this, which kind of gave it away. But you unpin PowerShell and Server Manager, and you pin Windows Media Player and Internet Explorer. Now, I'm not recommending you pin Windows Media Player. I'm just saying that if you want it to look exactly like Windows 7, that's what you do. Whether you do Windows Media Player or not, that's your prerogative. Start menu items. So display all those as a link. Just display those, and then don't display the other ones. Now, again, I don't know if I agree with do not display favorites. I kind of like seeing the favorites in the Start menu. I kind of like being able to see what my printers in the Start menu. But this is just to make it look like Windows 7. That's what these are. But you should get rid of system admin tools, definitely. Honestly, you can probably get rid of Run as well. A lot of users, some of us who know what we're doing, are kind of experts on it. Instead of going up and finding Microsoft Word, we just type Word or WinWord. And same with the other applications, but a lot of users will go hunting and they'll have their favorites and all that, put on their desktop. So. Now, the Start menu behavior, enable context menus while dragging and dropping. You get to enable that. The two I have crossed out, you would do this, again, if you want it to look like Windows 7. I typically don't. You're not really going to be installing applications on Windows 7 very often, and I honestly hate that, when they highlight the newly installed apps. You don't need that. And then open submenus when paused over with the mouse. So, if you're going in the Start menu, and you pause, then the submenu pops open. What we typically recommend is turn that off. We want the user to click to open the folder because if there's latency on the line, it's going to pop that window open. And if you're on a line that has latency and now the window popped open, it's going to slow it down even further. So it's like, let's just turn that off as well. But that makes it a little bit different than Windows 7, but it's just more optimized. And then the search, basically disable the searching for communications, favorites, histories, files, and programs. Even if or to enable search in those areas, but even if you disable Windows search, the search in these areas, it still works. It just might take a little bit longer. Start menu, these are kind of pointless. Sort by name, use large icons, limit most recently used documents, but again, that's to make it look like Windows 7. So all the vendors out there, Citrix, VMware, EMC, even Project VRC, I'm missing a lot of them, have optimization guides on Windows 7 and Windows XP. And there's a lot of similarities between them all, because everyone It makes sense. Same operating system coming from different people trying to do the exact same thing. You would think you come out with the same result. Actually, this is the best one I have seen, is on 2008 R2 Xenapp 6 optimization, is on citrixtools.net. The amount of stuff they have on there to optimize is huge. So, you want to optimize the system. And you can't use the same optimizations for Windows 7 and just put them onto 2008. Some of them will work, but you're going to miss a lot of them because it's a server operating system. So you want to go to the citrixtools.net and look at the optimizations they have there and apply those to your systems to make sure it's optimized. Now, there are some things we want to disable that they're automated. We want to disable these. Turn off Windows Update. Turn off the Windows Update device driver search prompts. So it's not going to search, if the users happen to get in there, it's not going to start updating drivers on a production Xenapp server. Within the help and support, turning off a lot of different items on there. A lot of times what users will be searching for, they don't really need to go to the Microsoft knowledge base. That's more troubleshooting, for the admin, not for the user. Same thing with device driver search. There's really no point in the user searching for device drivers. Removable storage, turn off some of the items on there. Disable Internet Explorer's update notifications. These are all the things that should be managed by the admin. Now we go into the user level settings, and this really just focuses on the user experience, making sure, trying to get it to align as much as possible to Windows 7. So within Control Panel, we only want to show these things. There's a lot more in there, and this is of course the GPO, and you just go in there and just pick these to show. Again, to make it look like Windows 7. We want to, of course, hide the add remove programs. We don't want people to be adding and removing programs off of Xenapp. That would be bad. We want to hide Windows components, remove programs, CD-ROM stuff, add programs from the network, set program access and defaults, programs and features page. We want to remove all this stuff. We don't want users in there. We also, for themes, I recommend keeping it on because I like happy users. They annoy me less. But we typically recommend is turn it on, but create one. If it's just the company background, that's fine, and assign it to all the users, and then let them change it from there. If not, at least they have something besides the fish that's on the Windows 7 or whatever, or the little window icon that comes with Windows 2008. Just give them something, so it looks more like a desktop. And if they want to change it, they can. They'll probably figure out how. One user will figure out how, and they'll tell all the other users. It's kind of like a virus. I didn't say users are viruses, but you can infer whatever you want. The desktop and start menu, there's some context. When you right-click on computer and recycle bin, you get some context menus. Like you right-click on my computer, or I guess now it's called computer. You get manage, and you get into services. You get into the event viewer. You get a bunch of fun stuff. Yeah, we don't want that. So let's disable the context menus. From the start menu, removing shutdown, restart, sleep, hibernate's a pretty good thing. That would be bad. Help, links, Windows Update, run, Action Center, networking icon. Yeah, the Action Center, we should just remove that for everybody. But just things that users, again, don't need to get to. So, registry. There's a GPO to remove access to reg editing tools. Very good thing. Now, there's a sub-policy to that of disable silent registry run. And this is kind of how your environment is. I would recommend disable this because there are some smart users who will figure out that they can do a silent registry add and it'll work. Disable that and then it won't work, which is good. Unless if you have logon scripts that are importing stuff in the registry, then you just broke your logon script. So I recommend turn it off unless if you need it for some reason for your environment. Internet Explorer, disable all that stuff, proxy settings, advanced page, connections, security programs. A lot of times, there's going to be a proxy server, or else, you're going to have some of the different settings in there. It's going to open up specific programs for different things you're going to be clicking on, or you might be blocking certain websites. So if you work at VMware, you're probably blocking Citrix websites, maybe. I'm not sure, but that was a joke. That wasn't very funny. MMC. So There might be a case where the MMC console, people might need this. You can disable this for the users, but MMC itself is fine. It's the plugins that are dangerous. So take a look at the plugins that are available within the MMC console, the different types of snap-ins, and you can disable. Pick which ones you want to allow users to have access to, if any. So you go through there and just make sure you don't leave it wide open. So you want to make sure you remove a lot of the different snap-ins that users can get to. The IOPS sessions I was in talked about this task scheduler and talked about how there's tons of different tasks in there, and there are. But from the user perspective, what we want to do is we want to make sure they can't change anything. We don't want them to start one. We don't want them to end one. We don't want them to create one. We don't want them to delete one. We want to remove all the functionality or all the different rights that they would have to the task scheduler. Windows Explorer, yeah, we don't want them removing hardware from our servers. That would be bad. We don't want them changing the security items and, again, hiding and managing the context menu. So what's fascinating about this is I swear I've said hide different context menus, and they're all over the place. So there's lots of different GPOs in here that you have to find. Like Windows Explorer, for the Start menu, for My Computer, for Recycle Bin, for Internet Explorer, all these different things you got to hide these stupid context menus. So there's lots of different things you got to go through and find the GPOs for. Windows Update, yeah, you would want to, on the shutdown operation, so when it shuts down, there is an option that says, do you want to install these updates before you shut down? A user could potentially see that if they're actually on the server while you as an admin shut that down. You don't want them to say no. You might, but pretty much you want the admin to be in control of what's going to be installed and not. And so after you get those options, what happens when it shuts down and the different types of display options, you also just want to remove access to Windows Update. Super secure options, that's my car. Citrix doesn't pay me enough. That's how I lock my car. There are certain environments where these recommendations aren't enough. How it is right now, if we stopped right here, users would still have access to different components within the environment. So for instance, Task Manager. I love Task Manager because how many different applications just stop working in Windows and you just have to kill it. I use Task Manager like crazy. I use Task Manager, I think, more than I use Windows. But certain environments, you don't want users to have access to Task Manager to be killing systems. Now, I don't know why, but there have been certain customers that want this functionality removed. And if you're a user, as long as you're not a power user and admin, and you hit that show process for all users, it doesn't work. It only works for admins and maybe power users, I can't remember. So they would have control over their system, but there can be a case where they kill a process, and it could potentially blue screen the server. So now I remember that was the reason why we had to take that away from the users. And then there's some super secure options. I don't know why changing backgrounds is super secure, but we see this in the super secure sites we go to, is they want the backgrounds turned off, the themes turned off, pinning to the start menu turned off, any customizations to the task manager, taskbar and all that turned off. We remove devices and printers, and then any type of the application's configuration. We want all that stuff disabled. And a lot of times where we see this at is in the call center. All you are supposed to do is be in this application and work in that application, answering calls and supporting the people who are calling in. So my question for those type of customers it's like, why do they have a desktop? They don't need one. Let's just put them to the application. We don't have to worry about a lot of this other stuff. So it's lots of stuff, and if I was a really nice person, I would have just, given you all the different, links to the GPOs. So now you guys all have to go out there and go into the GPOs. Like, where was that one he was talking about? Yeah. So luckily, Citrix is nicer than I am. So there is this. You would never have guessed to download this thing because it's for service providers. It's the service provider automation pack. It's for the Citrix partners that are going to be hosting virtual desktops to their customers. So as an admin, probably would never have downloaded this thing. But all the stuff I've talked about is in there as policies. So what you do is you download this thing, you install it. You know what? Even if you aren't using Xenapp, you can use it just for terminal services because they're all just Windows GPOs, not really Xenapp GPOs. So if you're one of the people that aren't smart, using Xenapp, just using terminal services, there's my little Citrix plug. You can still use this on terminal services. So what happens is when you install this, you have to run like some type of PowerShell command, and it will install these things for you. It'll go into Active Directory, and it's going to create 4 different group policy objects. There'll be a machine, there will be a user config. There's like 2 different user configs, like a secure one and a personalized one. And the secured one only changes a few things. All that it changed was those. It just disabled this stuff. So they're very similar. But the policies are all set in there for you. So you can go in there, and if you just apply this specific GPO to your environment, then all these settings on how to configure Windows 2008 R2 will look like Windows 7 and act just like Windows 7. But again, you might want to go in there and modify these things as well, just so you might want to turn some things off. You might not like how Windows 7 does certain things, because I know I don't. So basically is, one, don't assume you need a desktop interface. A lot of people don't, but all of us VDI vendors love to say that you do. Pick the right option. A couple years ago, Citrix said Xenapp was the right option, and then we said Xendesktop was the right option. Now we say it depends, because we have multiple options. Other vendors say their solution's the right option, which it is for them. But you got to find the right one that's the right one for you. The current skill set is actually a major role. If you are using Xenapp now and you're good at it, you probably want to try to keep using it for your other users instead of learning a whole new system, instead of trying to understand MCS, Xendesktop controllers, all the other stuff that goes along with it. If you already know Xenapp, you probably want to keep using it for as much as you can. If you have no clue what Xenapp is and you're going to do VDI, then yeah, you might not want to be looking down the Xenapp route. And then you also need to decide between scalability and functionality. So, there's a huge difference in scalability between Xenapp and a Xendesktop type environment. And those are, of course, you see the scalability numbers, scalability numbers that come out on Xenapp, and it's like some crazy number. What we're typically seeing is like 200 users on a Xenapp server. What we see on a Xendesktop environment, 70, 80 maybe, and it's like same type of hardware. So you got to decide: do you want fewer hardware? You want less hardware in your environment, or do you want the desktop, the actual desktop, the Windows 7 desktop, where you will get more functionality? All of your USB stuff will pretty much work for the most part, as opposed to Xenapp, where you might have some issues with different funky USB things. You will have very specific functionality within. You will lose some functionality in the Xenapp environment. And honestly, it's kind of a test to see if you get it or not. It's really hard to say what will work and what won't. So you really have to decide that on your own. But with that, we finished early because I want to go down there and claim my Xbox that I'm definitely going to win for filling out that orange piece of paper. But does anyone have any questions?
You talked about the differences between Xenapp and desktop when it comes to multimedia, HDX capabilities. Are there any major differences?
The question was any of the multimedia capabilities between Xenapp and Xendesktop, and there really aren't. There used to be, and I know with Xenapp 6, it became more on par with Xendesktop 5, and then the next version of Xenapp, Iron Cove that's coming out, they're pretty much identical. So it's basically whichever one came out last is the one that has the best HDX. So Iron Cove, I think, I don't know when they come out, but if Iron Cove comes out before AllSAS, then Iron Cove will be better than Xenapp will be better than Xendesktop until the Xendesktop version comes out, and then that one might be a little bit better then.
Wonder if you could speak briefly to the other challenge that we've seen in 32 versus 64-bit for app compatibility. 32, 64-bit app compatibility. The only issues we've seen are, of course, what you would expect of 16-bit apps. We have seen very few people that have 64-bit applications. Even still, of course, you get the Office and those type of apps. That's easy because it's Microsoft. But you're going to get, some of the bigger line of business applications are. But I deal a lot in the healthcare, and I'm just even trying to think if like, even the Epics and the Cerners out there are even 64-bit yet. And so a lot of those, it's like you're still running the 32-bit environments. But of course, you go down the latest version of Xenapp, you're kind of stuck at 64. So that kind of makes it a little bit more difficult for you on that aspect. It's coming, for all these different vendors, but for some it's going to be slow. So for the environments that end up going down the Xenapp route, a lot of them have the mixed farm environment where their desktop interface is Xenapp 6 Windows 2008 R2, and then because we can make that look like Windows 7, and then those 32-bit applications that of course might not run. A lot of them do run, but ones that don't, we then have to stand up a Windows 2003 environment on the side and publish into the hosted shared desktop. But basically what we've seen in the last year is the size of the 2008 environments are growing, and the 2003s are shrinking pretty quickly because a lot of the applications are being updated, so they're not 64-bit, but they do work. Of course, they do use more RAM and use more processing power than they would on 2003.
For those of us who have that situation where we have some 32-bit apps that have to be, do they have any where we have to use a 2003 presentation server to publish those apps to our desktops? Do they have optimization packs available like the one that you pointed out here as a package to download, or is that something new just for the Xenapp 6?
That is, it's not really for Xenapp 6. Even though it says it is, it's for 2008 R2. I mean, all those GPOs, all the things we talked about, none of them even touched on Xenapp. They're all 2008 R2 group policy objects. Okay. So some of them would still work on 2003, but a lot of them won't. And a lot of them actually won't even be relevant because in that type of environment where you have a 2008 R2, that would be your desktop. And then you would publish seamlessly into that desktop, so you would never see the 2003 desktop. So reconfiguring the start menu, doing all other crazy stuff, just wouldn't, it wouldn't. If you could do it, the user would never see it, so it would kind of be irrelevant.
I see. But as far as SMB tuning or anything like that, are there, I guess, a white paper for that?
Yeah, and the what was that, citrixtools.net, a lot of the optimizations would help in that. No one has really spent that much time looking at IOPS on Xenapp. The only article I've ever seen that was talking about it was by Paul Wilson, and he did this Xenapp IOPS study, and I think his website's virtualizationjedi.com, and I think he's a Star Wars fan, but I'm not sure about that. And he even said he's like yeah, it was really hard to come up with IOPS numbers, but when we talk in the VDI case where on the low end you're looking at like 6, on the high end you're looking up to 50 in the steady state. For Xenapp he was like yeah, it was like 1, for a light user, and for a heavy user it was like 3 or 4. It's because the operating system's all shared and it's all cached in RAM, so that's why you got rid of a lot of that stuff. Because I've been doing Xenapp since late 90s, or Metaframe and WinFrame and all that. I never talked about IOPS. I mean, there was never a concern. Even when we started virtualizing this thing, on VMware, initially, no one talked about IOPS. There was never a concern because it's so low on this type of environment because of the shared operating system. It's the operating system that's killing you, and then the application startup's killing you for the IOPS. And so if I got, I have one operating system. I got one version of Word. If one user starts Word, I have an IOPS hit. The second user that starts Word, I don't have an IOPS hit because it's already been loaded. So that's why we've really never talked about an IOPS issue or a storage issue with the Xenapp environment. It's just easier. Any other questions? Or are we out of time? When's this end? Almost out? Okay. Oh, okay. Any more questions? Great. And if you win the Xbox, you can give it to me. I'd appreciate it. I don't own one yet. But with that, I'd like to thank you all.